You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
This podcast is presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, telling Oklahoma stories through its people since 1927. Follow them online at oklahomahof.com and definitely on Instagram at oklahomahof. Let's get into today's episode. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode in Oklahoma City today with my guest, Mr. Greg Horton, at ex-pastor on Instagram if you want to follow him while you're listening and look up and read about some amazing food scene in Oklahoma City. But that's not all he's done. He's done amazing things, got a bit of a journey, which I always love to interview people who have been on quite a journey. But Greg, thanks so much for coming down. Excited to dive in, and I'm excited to learn about the Oklahoma City food scene because, I mean, you are in it every second, right?
Yes.
So you know everything that's coming, everything that's...
I think I cook at home 3 times a year. You laugh, but I think that's about right. Sincerely,
I mean, yeah. That's, hey, if you're not paying to go out and eat all the time, someone's covering your bills, and I will sign me up.
Yeah, I wish it worked that way, but it doesn't anymore.
Not a business expense
Pretty
anymore.
much got to pay your own way.
Oh, shame.
That's what, like, when people are always like, what does it take to be a food writer? Disposable income. Yeah, whatever, however you want to phrase that, that's kind of what's required.
That is fair.
Yeah.
So right now then you write predominantly for 4 or 5 magazine?
Yes. So that, I'm sure that umbrella company's Hilltop Media,
sure,
Corpus Christi, and so I do write for the Bend occasionally, but most of the food writing I do right now is certainly 405, and then I'm also back to writing for the Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Nice.
I covered food for them pre-pandemic, and they've asked me to come back and do some blog posts on food stuff, and I think I've done 3 or 4 so far this summer.
Yeah.
So that was always a good relationship too, and both of those entities allow you to sort of put the best face forward for Oklahoma City.
Yeah. Writing come to you from an early age, or is it something that comes in later on?
I taught writing at the college level, and it was miserable because I mean that also. I love kids, and I love the students. Right. It was great, but writing is one of those things like singing, I guess, that you can either do it or you can't.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get better, but if you. I've always been able to do it. The whole thing, high school newspaper, all of that,
right,
comes fairly easily to me. And I as someone who's teaching students, they're not really great, like, with that idea. It's like, oh, cool. So we struggle with this and you don't. But that's what I've been doing. I think I published my first story in 1990.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's been
32 years.
Yeah.
I only know that because I was born in 1990.
Oh, congratulations.
That's the only reason that my math is good.
Yeah, so. It was, yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't a food story, but yeah, that was the first year was 1990.
Yeah. So going back then, to kick it off, born and raised here?
No, my father was Army. So my mother came back to Oklahoma. There were 3 boys.
Okay.
Her family's, they're from here.
Yeah.
But she'd come back, have the children, to be around her family, and then meet my dad wherever he was stationed at the time, because he was career.
Yeah.
And so I lived in Oklahoma twice before I was 20.
So you got just a free way to travel the world.
I think my first 10 years of life were primarily Japan. We were in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And then a good chunk of Colorado and Texas.
I love Japan.
It was, it's a great place to be a kid too. It was weird because they sell fireworks year round, and I was a towhead at the time, so people come up and rub my white hair, and it was just very, very strange experience. But it's a beautiful, fantastic, whimsical, amazing country. I want to go back. We're talking about going back to Tokyo next year on a trip, because it's a very unique thing.
It's so different.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's, you go to Europe, or you go to somewhere in the US or Canada, whatever, Mexico, like, it's similar. But going there, I mean, it is a different world, isn't it?
It felt as a kid like you're in a carnival constantly.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, it was the 60s, because I'm old, pre-old. But I remember getting robots with video monitors and that moved when I was like a kid, because Japan was so far ahead of the U.S. technologically at that time. And so as a kid there, you're like toy stores and, fireworks, and you get to get out of the pier every day in Tokyo and see the ocean. It was just a wonderful place to be a kid.
Yeah. One of the things when I was there, I realized that, like, nobody really eats dessert food, and the vending machines were like amazing.
Yeah. Even today, like the
So
Sandoichi
cool.
machines, like you go in there
Yeah.
and then and like the Sandoichi guys were just in town for that pop-up. But that whole aesthetic comes from those vending machines of the sandwich is sliced in half and then the beautiful sort of, they think in terms of how is this going to look when we slice it? Because it really is sort of an aesthetic and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's like if we saw it at 7-Eleven or whatever, it'd be like tuna salad sandwich. No, we're good. Thanks. Don't need that. But their vending machines are a way different experience.
Yeah. It's hard to explain, isn't it? But for people listening, like Google it because it's fascinating how kind of they do that. But so you grow up then with quite a broad sense of the world then.
Yes.
Which is
and
amazing.
I joined the military at 17. I turned 18 in basic training. And so I was immediately, that's how I ended up in the UK.
Yeah.
I was there for a year and a half as well. And so, I do think being a military kid is a liability and an asset. I mean, it's just, you're moving every 6 months, 10 months, 12, 2 years, whatever. But you're also meeting new people, experiencing new things, tasting new stuff. That's one of my struggles with people when I write about food is if you're not an adventurous eater, I mean, I don't know how to deal with people like that. I have friends who are like, I got my chicken nuggets, I'm good. And it's like, okay, I'm so sad for you. And it's whatever. If that's their thing, that's fine. But man, for me, like I still, when I smell those little soy crackers that you associate with Japanese food where they have the little seaweed wrapped around them, that smell just sends me right back to Tokyo, where we're at the pier and we're looking out on the ocean and the water's super green and there's starfish everywhere. And that fish market smell is still a very pleasant memory for me.
Yeah. That's the great thing about food, isn't it? Like food and travel. It takes you back to a time when you were a kid or you were this or you were that. Yeah. And it's like music as well. Music is the same thing.
It's almost always good memories associated with the food. Yes. Almost always. But yes. Yeah, there's some bad food. There's some bad food memories.
Well, if you eat food long enough, right, for as much as you do, right?
I mentally clock my worst meal of the year, and I never write about it. Obviously, it would be a mean spirited thing to do.
It's in a burn book
but I know what it is, and if someone asked me, I would probably tell them. But yeah, mostly those are pleasant memories.
Yeah,
to a great degree.
Yeah. So you were like, I'm in the army then. I'm in the military.
Well, I mean, there's a longer story to that, but yeah, it's long enough ago that I was about to get married because that's what you do, Seminole, Oklahoma, whatever. And my father had been Army, and I knew that for me the benefits were great because I wanted to keep moving. Like I wanted to go overseas again, and they offered me a pretty good sort of vocational opportunity, Russian linguist. So 18 months of language school, and then pretty choice bases around the world where you land. And that's back in the days when there was a Soviet Union, and so there was a ton of Russian linguists in the military at the time. And I was in Seminole. I mean, Seminole, Oklahoma, and whatever. I don't know what you do there.
Yeah, especially with your world traveling experience. All of that. If you grow up there, it's fine.
Yeah, and I got back, I guess, from the military too. But before I left, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know where we're going to end up. But the military seemed to be an opportunity. And then even getting back from the military back to Seminole, I got out again as fast as I could because I'm a city. I live downtown. I live right downtown proper, and that's where I prefer. If I moved anywhere else, which I'm not likely to at this point in my life, I would find a downtown place. Yeah, or at least urban core kind of an idea.
To be in the bustle and like the energy of it, rather than I'm going to be in a suburb 20 minutes away. Yeah,
that's right. And to me, because of what I do. Like I struggle sometimes with Edmund and Norman because I want to do due diligence and cover, the 4 cardinal directions, but I also don't want to go out there and drink and then have to get back home. Yeah. So I end up doing lunches there or something like that, which isn't necessarily the full experience of a restaurant. It depends on what you're doing. But yeah, that for me is being able to walk out of my apartment and 3 blocks later I'm on my favorite bars. I don't want to trade. I'll take all the noise just to have those experiences.
Yeah, that's very much like the UK.
Yeah.
Right? Like you walk everywhere.
Yeah.
You just pub hop if you want to, and you can go to 5 or 6 pubs in one night and not really walk for more than 4 miles.
Yeah,
3 miles.
I do miss those days when you have like a pocket full of pound coins and your darts in the other pocket, and you're going and the drunker you get, the better you are at subtracting from 501. Oh yeah, it's like this is an amazing. I'm good at math, and it's really no, you're not. You're just good at this one function of math. Yeah, on beer. Absolutely.
There's not going to be many people that get that, but I get it. So I appreciate that analogy. Most of the people listening probably like, what is 501? Oh, they might even start at 301. But
Yeah.
Google it.
Yeah, we
please.
always played 501.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the chalk as well. And the chalk on the
the real
dartboards.
horsehair dartboards, the real things. Like, there's a few of those in Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
But most of our dart leagues obviously are plastic tip darts and squeaky boards. I just don't. It's not the same thing.
It's not the same in a smoky, hazy, terrible lit pub, and you're trying to throw a dart.
Usually it's bad beer. At least
warm beer.
Exactly. It's like, no, I don't want that.
Yeah. So, do you learn Russian then? Do you go?
No, I don't anymore. I mean, when you leave a language behind.
So you did learn it then?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that was the thing. Was we did that. That was my career in the military for a little while.
Yeah.
Was that translation process, but that was 30 years ago.
So you were listening to
transmissions from the then Soviet Union. Absolutely, yeah.
Listening in on trying to spy on them or trying to get information and stuff.
See, I wouldn't go that far. I'm not sure. It was more knowing where things were.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. And it was just a fascinating process. And of course, being at Chicksands, which is this tiny little base above London, like maybe 50 miles, that we had a huge antenna. Called the Flare 9. It has these huge white cylinders. So every time a taxi driver would pick me up from the base to take me into Bedford to drink or whatever, they'd say, "Are those nuclear missiles?" I'm like, "No, I swear to you, that's an antenna."
It's an antenna.
But anybody seeing that's like, "No, you're having me on that. It's not
That's
an
a
antenna."
rocket.
I was like, I swear to God, it's an antenna. But yeah, that was. But it was a quaint, beautiful. It's one of the rare military bases where they had to allow the locals only because it was one of those. I don't know what they call it in Britain, the trust, some kind of trust building. So there was a priory there, and so they just you're going to this basically NSA military base installation thing, and then there's these Brits walking in to see the geese, and it's just like, okay, cool. It's
a very British thing.
It was actually fantastic. The people around the base were lovely, and we had a great time, and there were great little pubs around there. Yeah. And I know that's happening in England too, with the sort of commodification and everything, and the consolidation. You're getting those corporate pubs instead of those great mom and pops that made everything great. So.
Yeah, you get like franchise pubs now, right? Yeah. Breweries and chains and stuff like that. But yeah, you're right. Like the small, that's like, no, you're never going to get that here, right? Because every military base here is like fenced off and in the middle of nowhere, and it's got security all around it. Whereas back home, it's like, they'll be fine.
Well, that's 100% the case.
They don't know anything, so what are they going to do, right?
It was, I have to say, it was a strength. Having grown up in the military, to see that kind of lack of security around a gate, I was like, oh, okay, well, this is a new thing.
Come on down. Yeah, I had a family member who was in former family member who was in the Royal Air Force, and like they had a gate, obviously, because you're an airport, and we had to go in there and give them your badge and stuff. But at the same time, like the town that they lived in, everyone's like, you could get places, right?
Absolutely,
you just couldn't get on the runway.
No, that's the way. I mean, that's the way, and I like that British model. I really do, where it's more integrated into the community. In the U.S., we rely on them for their economic impact on a place, but they're fairly isolated from the life of the community. And I get that it's a transitory existence. You're there and you're gone 2 years later or 3 years later, but. For me, I didn't live on base at first. I lived in Bedford, and it was a wonderful. That's how I met. We talked before we started about the people from Blackpool and Cyprus, and our neighbors were just these lovely people that were excited to have Americans living next door, and they were appalled that I hated gardening. I'm like, I'm not. He's like, you gonna cut Jeff's name? You gonna cut your grass? No, not this week. No, probably not. But I will get to it. I promise. Yeah.
It's like Greg's the one with the jungle next door.
Exactly right. It's like biodiversity. We'll call it. Exactly.
Yeah, the seasons will figure it out and grass will die. It's fine.
Exactly.
It'll take care of itself. Or some like animal will come and chew it out. It'll be fine. Do you miss it? Do you miss being in the UK?
I was 18, maybe 9. I was 19 when we landed in the UK. And I remember the bus ride from Gatwick, so I think where we landed, to Bedford. And it was just the most beautiful countryside I'd ever seen. And I grew up everywhere, like literally. And Colorado was like kind of home to me. We were in Aurora, Denver for most of my formative years. But I mean, England is just, it's beautiful, and it's beautiful in that pastoral way, right? Where you see the rolling hills, and then there's the small farms, and they have the sort of stone fences that segment stuff off, and then of course there's the sprawl and insanity that's London that I absolutely, I can't even tell you how we avoided death or jail in London so many times, because you just jump on the train and you're down there in no time at all. Note to city politicians: please give us a train to Tulsa.
Yeah.
That sort of high speed thing is phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
It changes your experience of a place.
Yeah. Because you're right. It brings people in from 2-3 hours outside of London to go experience it, and then they jump on the train and go home.
How much fun it would be to jump on a train and be in Tulsa in 30 minutes?
So much better, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll happen one day. Hopefully we're here.
Well, I'm getting old enough that I'm worried about those one day sort of statements. Exactly.
Yeah, because chartering a luxury cab up there is not fun, is it? I'm driving yourself.
No, it's not miserable. The same thing. No, and I don't want one of those stripper poles in the middle of my bus on the way to Tulsa either. I've never understood that. It's like, does somebody really use these things? I don't know what's happening.
What are those buses called? Blue something?
Yeah.
Blue or black diamond buses, something like that. Gosh. Party buses.
Yeah.
God.
It's like, what's the stripper pole for?
It's like getting on the tram in Oklahoma City, right, or whatever streetcar. Like, there's 3 of these poles here. This is not what I'm used to. Used to having one.
It's like, yes, exactly,
just like that. That's hilarious. Because one of the things that also drives me nuts is driving to Tulsa. Why we only have 2 lanes with as much room as we have in this country, in this state. Like, why didn't you put 3 lanes in? But that's another topic that we could talk about Oklahoma City roads for a long time.
Transportation podcast coming up.
Pain in the backside. So military, you're in. How many years did you do in the military before you get out?
4, a little over 4. Yeah.
So not a big stint then.
It wasn't for me. Let's put it that way. It was.
Were you politely asked to leave?
I don't think my father much cared for it either. He just did it because that generation was a little more duty bound than we were. And so he had 3 sons and he had to provide. And so he did 22, 25 range.
Got you.
And didn't suit him either.
Yeah.
But he stuck with it. I just didn't have to stick with it. And so, and I don't regret it. I think it's awesome. And I think anybody that does it can benefit from it. But I teach college now too. And I get those kids that come back from, GI Bill stuff, and they've made a deal with the devil. It's like, maybe you get combat, maybe you don't. Like, my grandson's now a Marine in Okinawa. And so as soon as Ukraine kicked off, you cross your fingers and hope for the best. And you don't want an 18-year-old kid showing up in a country he's never been in to shoot at people he's never met.
Right.
Yeah.
In a war that really makes no difference.
No difference to, it's some of the, and that's the thing, like, you grew up in the military and you think in those categories, right? Yeah. Like, we grew up in a very racially diverse sort of culture.
Yeah.
Military culture was that way. And you don't think about things like, those sort of things that people who are civilians are consumed with. Because my dad was in Vietnam. He was a combat veteran, and you're worried that your dad's going to come home or not come home. And so it didn't much matter who you were. If you were enlisted, all the enlisted kids' fathers were in the same boat. And now these days, mothers to another extent as well. And then it was primarily men. So it does create an interesting sort of insular community that I think is good for you in some ways. Long term, they're still studying some of that, and my older brother's involved in some of those groups where the dependents of the military have gone on to sort of discuss what the ramifications are long term.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, it wasn't a good fit.
Yeah. And the good thing is you found that out really early on.
Yes. Yeah, I was quite young. I was 22, 23 when I got out. So 22, I think, when I got out.
So then you come back to family in Seminole?
Yeah, I came back to Oklahoma, and I was in Seminole, and I didn't know what I was going to do with my life at that point. I'd done some college in the military, and I took a job as a furniture delivery guy.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to work one day, and the dude, I can't even remember his name, and they were on Main Street in Seminole back when such a thing existed. And he called me aside one day. He says, Horton, I'm firing you. I'm like, what? I was like, I thought I was doing a good job. He said, you're doing a great job, but this is not the world for you. Go find a real job, do something with your life, go to college. You should not be doing this. You're going to throw your back out, ruin the rest of your life. You're fired.
What a hero.
I mean, as a kid, I was like, young 20s, I was pissed. Well, I was like, I needed a job, but he did the best thing for me. 100%. So I enrolled in OU the next semester.
Okay.
And so that, but then. So that got me out of Seminole, which is where I badly needed to be. Yeah. And then, listen, if you like small towns, if that's your experience with them, I get it. Some people love them, and they're meant to be there. I honestly would rather be in jail.
Which we might get to in a little bit.
Which we might get to eventually. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah. So then you're off to college for a little bit, and you're like, I have a career now. I have a second chance. What am I going to do?
My father had relocated to Oklahoma. He was in Norman, actually. Actually, South Oklahoma City, close enough to Norman. And he was a nurse. Yeah. When he got out of the military, he finished his training and became a nurse. And that's how he was still a nurse. I think still working when he died, honestly, a little bit.
Yeah.
And he'd moved here, so I came up here and stayed with him for a little bit while I was at OU. I didn't like the Norman feel, so I just commuted. I moved back to Seminole with some friends in a place that we got, and then I would go up to Norman for class. And then I got it down to where I was only going to like 1 day a week, which was ideal at the time. But I didn't finish there. There was a long delay after that.
Yeah. When does, I mean, obviously, you know, you're back and forth to Norman, and then you're like, I'm down to 1 day, and you just think, this is not for me, I'm gonna do something else? Or like, I mean, how do we go from there?
Well, I mean, I guess we'll just, I robbed a bank.
That's
what happened. I was still,
okay.
I was going to, I think they called it Seminole Community College or Seminole something at the time. It's now Seminole State College.
With the group of mates that you just said?
Well, yeah, so I had a couple of friends, and we were, I don't know what happens when you have ADHD and nothing to do. Yeah, it's like we were already petty criminals, and we're like, we should do something that pays better,
right? And
so we robbed a bank, and it turns out the FBI have zero sense of humor, and we also didn't know the FBI was going to get involved. What I done, the criminal justice system, and so
right, you just think this is my small town.
No, exactly right. It's going to be like Barney Fife and all the sort of small town deputies with one bullet,
right?
But it ended up being a 4.5-year pause in my life where, did federal prison for 4.5 years. And fortunately...
In Oklahoma or not?
No, it was federal. So the only federal prison in Oklahoma City at the time was El Reno, and you don't want to go there for any reason. No, we were there 11 days to get processed. And like the first day we were there, this guy got stabbed to death in front of us. And we're just standing there, and this old convict walks up.
And you were like mid-20s?
Yeah, I was 23. And this old convict walks up, and he goes, y'all need to get going because they're going to round everybody up. And I'm like, oh, this is what we do. Cool. This is what someone dies, and you leave so you don't get sort of arrested. And it was just like, it's one of those moments like when I joined the military and I'm, 17 years old and you show up for basic training and you get there at 10 o'clock at night and the door opens and there's this huge dude and he's like, you're good. I'm like, I'm not good. And so there are those moments and you don't have a choice. That's just what happens, right? And then you have to sort of figure out, okay, what's the response to this?
Yeah.
And so we did 11 days there and then they sent us to Texarkana and then finally Big Spring. Because in the federal system, they can literally send you anywhere. And sometimes they even punish people by sending them as far from their family as possible.
Right.
But I was lucky because the time when I went in, the young guy that I'd robbed the bank with, the judges back then had this sense if you were young and vulnerable, then they could do buddy system. Then they'd pair you up.
Yeah.
And it really did help. There were a couple of moments where it was like, whew. But that was, so then I got out, but when I got out, I came back to Oklahoma City. Yeah. So that was 92. So when people ask me now, how long have you been in Oklahoma City? Since 92.
92.
No other details. But I got out and came back here, and my younger brother at that time sort of set me up, and I started doing soft goods sales.
Sure.
And then went into pastoring for about 14 years. And then that was in college, grad school, and all of that. I finished up. I went back to college at 28, 29. Finished my undergrad and then went to grad school. Finished that in 2005.
Have you written a book about this yet? Because you need.
No, so every time I talk to someone who's this just happened. Like recently, there's a journalist in LA that's kind of becoming a good friend, and she's got an agent. She used to talk to my agent, and I'm like, here's the problem with writing about this kind of thing: is that there's the Son of Sam law, which is the Fruits of Crime bill, which is good law. Don't get me wrong. When Sam Berkowitz, the Son of Sam, was killing all those people, he made a book deal, and so someone wisely said we probably shouldn't allow criminals to make money off of their crimes, and so the Fruits of Crime bill passes.
Makes sense.
Rightly so. Sometime late 70s, early 80s, whenever that Son of Sam thing was. And so, no, I could write it, but
you're not allowed.
I'd have to give it all to charity or something like that. But it's not that it's not a story I haven't told a few times.
Yeah, so a testimony.
Yeah, and that word is interesting that you would choose that, but I can go with that.
That's just me tying it.
No, but that's kind of... It's a story that has limited value, right?
Sure.
It's like, oh, cool, you robbed a bank. It's like I killed a kid. That's a story with zero value, right? Yeah. So with that one, there's some entertainment value. But what I do find it useful is I teach community college.
Yeah.
And I'm a big second chance person.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah.
And so you can tell the kids, like, listen, it doesn't really matter what you did. You can bounce back. There's a way to sort of move forward from that moment. And I think that's the value of that story more than, hey, he robbed a bank and that's super cool. And it really is a funny story all the way through. We got through a couple of roadblocks. We got pulled over, taken to a sheriff's office. They let us go. I mean, there's a lot of things that happened on that 3-day stretch when we were running from the law. But it was just... But again, at the moment, it's like, okay, this is happening.
Yeah.
So now what do I do? And you just kind of roll
reacting
with it. You just roll with it. It's like, okay, now I got to figure this out. Cops are chasing you at 120 miles an hour, and it's just like, this is not where I thought I was going to be right now in my life. I don't know where I thought I was going to be, but it wasn't on a dirt road outside of Colgate, Oklahoma. So yeah.
I assume back in that day you weren't getting you weren't live on News 9.
It was we actually made USA Today.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was so bad. It was so bad. I felt so horrible for my family. I just, it's, again, you make a decision and you go with it, and then you realize later on the repercussions.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So the second, third chance, whatever it is, is that how you then, while you're inside in jail, is that how you turn to faith in Christ?
Yeah, we'd grown up in church, and so for me, now I teach religion and I teach philosophy.
Yeah.
And I'm not a religious person any longer. But at the time, you learn that language when you're a kid, and when you go through those things, it becomes sort of a safe haven to go back to the language. And I keep saying it that way because I don't know that there's anything else that matters besides the words. And so that's what I did. I sort of investigating. But because I'm a writer, I've always done this. It's just once you start digging, I just don't want to stop digging.
Yeah.
Well, that isn't really great necessarily in a religious framework. At some point, they want you to stop digging, right? And so I just couldn't. And so I dug my way out, basically. Is what it is. So I finished a graduate degree in philosophy of religion, essentially, and I was done. Just literally done with the job and the faith. And so I left the ministry and started teaching. I got lucky because a friend of mine was also a member of the church, a retired police officer, and had got 2 master's degrees and taught English. And he connected me to some state schools where I could teach, and that's what got me started at OKC'ss back in the day. And I've been at OKC'ss now for 13 years, I think. Yeah. So, and they've been a fantastic place. And I'm only an adjunct. I don't really like the idea of full-time gigs, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah. So then while you're there, fast forwarding, that period of time, when do you start food writing?
That's so
because you've always said you always written.
That's right. And I said I wrote my first story in 1990. It's when I was in prison. Actually, I published 2 stories when I was in the penitentiary still. So I knew I was going to be able to be a writer. One of those weird moments too. I landed on A wing at Texarkana Federal Detention Center. And a gentleman on that floor, James Jennings, was from Oklahoma, and he'd written 50 books.
Oh wow!
But he was a famous counterfeiter that had gotten busted, and then the FBI used him to help out with. So he was on the Tonight Show and the whole thing.
He became a celebrity.
Yeah, but in those days, we had every once in a while I have a student who's like, I'm going to use a typewriter. You're a moron. You should not use a typewriter. Personally, I had to. That's how you wrote back then. And so, but he taught me everything it took to be a writer, like the manuscript process, the submission process, all of that, right? And that was really important at the time because I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And so I did that. And so in 2001, I was pastoring, and we did an installation at Laura's place, Untitled Gallery. Yeah. And it was this grad student from OU who had done this sort of provocative Israeli versus Palestinian thing. And so we did a Good Friday. We had an imam, we had a rabbi, we had me, we had the artist. And I remember Susan Grossman was the editor-in-chief at the Gazette at the time. And she was there. And so in her letter from the editor that week, she said, what Horton had to say about satire, yada, yada, yada. So I called her, and I'm like, I want to write for you. And she's like, do you write? I'm like, yeah, I write. And she's like, what do you write about? I'm like, well, what do you want me to write about? She goes, no, that's not the way this works. So do you have an idea?
Yeah.
I said, well, you don't have any religion coverage. You need some religion coverage. And so she actually agreed. Yeah. And so for a first couple of 2 or 3 stories, I wrote about religion. And then Susan gave way to Rob Collins, and I did a lot of stuff, music, art, hard news, a little bit of everything, just whatever I could do. Because I was a gig guy. I was just trying to whatever I could do to get paid.
Yeah.
And then 2007 or 8, Carol Smiglinski was the food editor at the Gazette at the time. I left. My then wife and I were living outside Piedmont. We were coming into town. Carol called, and she says, Greg, can you write about wine? Well, I drink a lot of it. So surely I can. I've always said yes.
I have a palate.
That's the gig thing, right? If you can you do this? Yes, I can do that. They asked me at one time, can you write about fashion? Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's the most banal of all of our vices, really. But I can do it. And so I did. But so for this one, she said, can you write about wine? I was like, sure. I said, when do you need it? She said, 4:00 today. So we turned the car around and went back. I wrote a story. It's like 20 bottles under $20, right? Because I was hand selling wine at the time at this little shop on the Northwest side. And I wrote about wine every week for 5 years after that. Yeah. And so when you write about wine, it's a funny thing, right? Everybody just assumes, well, Obviously, you can write about food too. Yeah. Of course, absolutely. Yeah. Of course I can. I write about wine, I write about food, I write about spirits, beer, doesn't matter. Yeah. And then it's 2016, was 14 really, Slice was before it became 405. I started working with Mia Kitchen and then Heidi Centrella as editors, and they really trusted me, and they let me go out and write about food. And people tell me, like, they'll introduce me today, he's a food writer. No, I'm a writer. 40% of what I write is about food, but I'm still just a writer.
Predominantly,
yeah, exactly. Like I've just transitioned now at the 405 sort of banner, whatever you want to call that. I went from being senior writer for 405 to being a senior writer for 405 Business.
Sure.
But I'm still a food editor at 405, so I'll still do dining for them and travel, but I'll do a lot of the main story writing for 405 Business, and I've really enjoyed writing business stories. Yeah. Because
they're fascinating.
They are, because there's a story behind that drives the story, right? Like I just did a piece about Johnny Sumflefarty. He's a Lao businessman.
Been on the podcast.
Okay, great. Yeah. And so
the hot sauce.
Right. And so I wrote about this idea. Here's this Lao American that is he's sick of his career, and he dives back in, and he dives into his culture and his heritage, and out of that comes this sort of passion for these products. And I think that's what writing is, right? It's what you do too. You dig into people's brains and sort of get them to say things that candidly. And so that's good business writing to me. Does it have numbers? Yes. Are there percentages and growth? Absolutely. But there's a human behind that with a dream or a passion or whatever. And so you try to sort of tap into that. Yeah. And I think, honestly, we're young. I think this is our third issue or fourth.
Oh yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, and I think we're doing a really solid job. I'm proud of what we're producing. I am at 405 too. I do think that, and I know you had Julie, our editor-in-chief, on the podcast, and there's a lot of energy at that magazine right now. We've transitioned over the years. I've been there, I could say, I started writing for them in 14, and then Jordan and Kaylee bought it in 2018, I believe. And they brought this new energy and youth and vitality and sort of this attitude that what we really are is evangelists for a city, right? You want to talk about what's great about Oklahoma City, and that's kind of what we try to do. Yeah. And I'm also quite proud of the fact that over the last several years, we have become a fairly diverse publication, right? So because the stories that constitute Oklahoma City, they are not just those old, well-endowed neighborhoods. They are the little taquerias down on 29th, and they're the East End Merchants Association on Northeast 23rd, and they're the West African foods that's popping up over on the west side now. It's like this amazing collection of stories that we want to. There's no meta narrative, you can't tie the whole thing together, but all those stories matter, and so and I think we're doing a more than respectable job of fleshing those out.
100%. To that point, Sharina Perry was in here yesterday. Sharina Perry from Utopia Plastics.
Oh my God.
She was in here yesterday. And I'm just like blown away.
How insane is that? It's like, bonkers. What if we did it this way? Yeah. Oh, we'll give you $100 million if you do it that way. Cool, exactly. Done.
Yeah. Like,
and it's just
in 4 years.
And so I think Katie Spillman, our editor-in-chief at Biz, told that story. But I just, when they first told me about her, I was stunned. I'm like, how have I not heard this story already? Yeah. This literally should be everywhere.
Right. And so, it will be soon.
And I think it will be too. Yeah. I agree, because I think her contracts that are coming in right now, she richly deserves. Yeah. I just think it's not often you get see someone rewarded for being smart and innovative and hardworking. I know that the narrative would say that, but it
usually they get paid off, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And forced to do something
else. And so she's getting to own the sort of, the byproduct of her brilliance and sort of ingenuity and all the innovation that she brought to it.
Yeah, Sharina's like, there's stories like that, like you said, you're like, why have I not heard of this? And the fact that, 405 is looking at all these stories. Yeah. And, even just the stories that you know of or the businesses you've heard of, like Lopez Foods, right?
Oh, yeah.
You don't know that story because that you see their company everywhere, but you're like, well, why has nobody told this story?
Well, and we're getting generational stories now, which I love. Like if you haven't been to Trompudo's Tacos yet on Southwest 60th in May, Lupe Garcia is the son of Chileno. And so, but he's not doing his father's Tex-Mex sort of emphasis. Chilinos, He's gone to Mexico City, and he's traveled extensively in Mexico, and he especially loved Cozumel in his time there. And he's learning, and he's learned to make tacos in a more traditional style, depending on which regional Mexican cuisine you're talking about. And they're the best tacos in Oklahoma City. Yeah. And he's doing it. He's utilizing his father's network because they have all those things that put everything together. Right. And I never would say that's clearly beneficial, right? That's all it's got to be. Never would say that he's done this on his own. But he has had the idea, had the passion, made the drive, done the process, invested the money, took the risk, and right now he's the guy. We've been predicting this for a while. It's like one of those, once in the future king, white messiah kind of stories that come along all the time. And we've been saying there's going to be someone that figures out how to bridge that river, like someone who's on the Mexican American side, does tacos, does whatever, all those traditional taquerias down there. They're going to figure out how to get white people happy on this side of town. Because the problem is, in all sincerity, there's two things happening. Like there's a language barrier when you go to Southwest 29th, and I'm tired of hearing people say, well, they don't speak English. No, you don't speak Spanish.
You don't speak Spanish.
They're fine in their neighborhood. Yeah. Everything's great down there. They're killing it, as a matter of fact. But it's also this idea, and there's nothing wrong with the idea, that when I sit down for Mexican food, I want margaritas. Well, a mixed bev license is fairly expensive, and so there's never been that sort of emphasis down there. Well, Lupe's done that. He's got a full bar with these creative cocktails, and so he's making delicious traditional food with the cocktails, and he's very, very comfortable in both languages, so much so, and I don't know people how respect how hard this is. He's capable of using puns and double entendres in both languages. That's a pretty impressive sort of mastery of a non-native language.
Yeah.
So those kind of stories are fantastic. So now the Hispanic community has been here long enough that the second and third generations, it's the same thing that happened in the Asian district now, where we're seeing Jenny Nguyen, whose family has Lee's sandwiches. She's doing boombox, will be open this summer, where she's doing vermicelli bowls. So second generation, third generation. So those stories become a family story, and you just keep telling that story, and it keeps unfolding. And I just have a lot of love for that whole process. I do, because as a kid, as in the middle of three, your parents have things they want for you. And you don't know necessarily that your ideas are going to align with theirs. And so when it does, like I see these families that have these sort of dynasties of whether it's food or sports or whatever, it's got to be an amazing moment when you realize that, this is me. I can do this. I'm made for this. This is what I'm going to do. Because you choose food service because you love it.
Yeah.
You don't choose it to get rich. You don't choose it because
to have the weekends off.
It's not because of the sex and the power. It's literally because you love dealing with cranky people who are hungry.
Right.
And you get a lot of love and satisfaction out of feeding people well.
Yeah. I had that conversation with Michael Kraft.
Yeah.
And Hank was on recently as well. And just like, how all that happened and how Michael gets in the business and the whole story of like Michael saying, hey, you got to come down to Old Miss and see breakfast down here, and him and Hank and Hal flying down there. And Hal said that they thought they were just going to go down and eat breakfast. Like they showed up. Michael had a full business plan and a full itinerary, and they ate breakfast literally for 10 hours. And then that's how Neighborhood Jam starts.
Yes,
And
I just want to say, I met Michael when he first moved back, when they first opened the first Neighborhood Jam, and he was walking around, and I talked to him, and now I call him all the time because he's really one of the bright young minds in food in Oklahoma. We have these young guns that are sort of driving the market right now. Michael Kraft is one, Travis Clark, Rachel Cope, Jay Mays. They're the ones who are, between 30 and 45, right in that range. And they have ideas and they have passion and they have a much simpler approach than the old school models where it's like Rachel, she'll just build a box. Okay, here's the box, fill it with good food. Down and dirty, we got this, and she's killing it, and she deserves all of her success. And so I see Michael Kraft as one of those guys too, because when you have a large company, and don't get me wrong, I love what Hal Smith does. You cannot fault the consistency that you find at Charleston's.
Right.
It doesn't matter which Charleston's you go to, you're going to get
exactly
those chicken nuggets. The chicken strips are going to taste delicious. The ribs, that's what they do. But you have to evolve, right? The company. And so Michael came along and he had this great idea, but he's not going to stop having great ideas, right? And so Jimmy B's is kind of a product of both generations pushing this thing out there as an homage to a friend, but it's also a brilliant cocktail bar. If you were to tell me 10 years ago that there would be a Hal Smith restaurant that's like a top 5 cocktail bar in the city, I'm like, no. You're making that up.
Yeah, that's not his idea.
But it is, and it's brilliant. And Jimmy B's works, and a lot of the reason it works is because it's this combination of modern American restaurant and badass cocktail bar.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It is.
And I mean, to know what that building was as well, and how they've built it out, structured it, and dropped the ceiling and made it look, giving you the character and the atmosphere that they have. phenomenal.
I'm a big fan. I really am. Yeah, as a matter of fact, the July issue, we have our cocktail spread, and it's beautiful. I'll say Christopher Lee, our art director, is just insane, and Lexi Hobing takes the best food pictures in the city. But we did a cocktail spread, and the first one, I think, is the Butterfly Effect at Jimmy B's.
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful drink, and it happens to taste good, too, which is always helpful.
Yeah. So when people say to you, because this comment comes up all the time, Oklahoma City's food scene's amazing, like, do you just roll your eyes? Because sometimes these people have no idea what they're talking about, but they've just heard people say it all the time, and they have never been to any of the great restaurants. Dude. Like, it must drive you nuts.
It's okay. So
good and a bad.
You're a podcaster. So if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I like this part of podcasting," and you're like, "Me too."
Yeah.
I also know 3,000 other parts of podcasting. So you could dive into that conversation with them if you wanted to, but mostly I've learned, not always well, to not have certain conversations with people, because if they like something, there's no value in talking them out of it, right?
Yeah.
And if they haven't experienced something, you can just kind of point in that direction and hope it works out. Mm. And so we just did this 100 things to eat in Oklahoma City list, which was super fun to put together. Yeah. And I'll have to tweak it as we go, because those restaurants closed. We'll just change those out because it's digital. But most of the feedback I got was from people who said, "Oh, I've had 7 of these or 24 of these." No one's had more than half.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And so they're all over the place. They're all over the metro, and it's everything from, I can get down and dirty. I mean, it's Lao food, and it's Guatemalan, and it's Nicaraguan and Honduran, and Fuju Chinese.
Every hole in the wall.
It's just everything you can think of. And it's just like, I don't think you understand. We have 35 ethnicities making food in Oklahoma City.
That much?
Yes. And when people think about it, they're just like, oh, okay, because if Central America is mostly covered. Like you can leave here where we are today, and you can be at a Salvadoran restaurant in 6 minutes, and then another 4 minutes you'll be at a Honduran restaurant, and if you take a left, you'll be at a Nicaraguan restaurant. So all of those sort of cluster around here, right? Yeah. And then if you go west of Portland, or WIPO, if you want to call it that, then you can start finding West African places too, because Catholic Charities has done a good job of settling. Like it was Cote d'Ivoire, it was Eritrea, and all those countries. Okay. They settled the refugees there. So of course, when refugee communities show up, we'll have Afghan food soon. I'm very sure, because we have Afghan refugees here now. So it's a matter of time. And I absolutely love that about this place. The kid that does this, I call him a kid, sorry. The young man that does the Sparrow Project, where they resettle, they help resettle refugees. They provide services for them. One of the things he talked about was how a city is this sort of thing that's always happening. It's always changing and it's growing. And ideally, a city opens its arms and welcomes new people and new types and new things and new cuisines and new ethnicities in, because they become part of the city, and the city re-identifies itself as something that also contains this. Yeah. And when it comes to food, I could not be happier about that narrative. Give me an Afghan restaurant. Seriously, today, I would go today if we had one. Right. Because it's new and I want to try it. Right. When Jeff Chanchaloon opened Maudaire, I'd had Lao food at 4J's, and then Casey Chanson she's a brilliant Lao chef herself, and she has Queen of Egg Rolls. But when I went and I tasted what every Thursday he does a soup. It's a soup. It's called khao soi. And the flavor profile in that thing, I sat there, and Dave Cathy, my friend from the Oklahoman, we were eating it, and I was just going, there's nothing like this in the city. Like literally nothing. Yeah. It's like this new, wonderful. Now, we can eat it often enough now. I'm sure people felt the same way about hummus when it first showed up. Right. But the first Lebanese immigrants got here before statehood, right? Yeah. So hummus is just like an Oklahoma food now. It's what we do. With tabbouleh, of course, steak with tabbouleh, everybody does that. So I'm pretty sure that these things will become part of, it's like pho has become like we still get visitors in Oklahoma City are like, what's pho? It's like, really? And these kids have grown up with it. Like, right, I'm teaching kids now who are 18. Yeah. And there's nothing more disturbing than having them tell you what year they were born every semester. And then, you sort of like, oh, cool. So after 9/11, wow, cool. So their whole, you get to reorient yourself constantly. Yeah. But they know what pho is from a very early age. And you have grown people showing up from other states and like, what's pho? Because now it's a staple for us, because it's become part of our city. They're part of who we are. And I absolutely love that. And I wish I think if we sort of saw food as culture, and not as a commodity, right? I'm going to a Mexican restaurant, not to be a and demand extra chips and more, all the things, but to sort of appreciate who the people are.
And queso with no pico.
Yeah. I like a taco, but can you hold the shell? And you don't have iceberg lettuce? Who doesn't have iceberg lettuce? Yeah, there's a great story. One of my favorite places on the southwest side, it's closed now. Rest rest in peace. Cardenas SLP. It's the first place I ever had a molita. And they've got Chilongo now over on like South Penn and 44th. But I was in there one day, and a friend of mine, Chris Castro, who you may know. Chris is great.
Great chef,
one of the
too,
great creative minds.
Great radio voice, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Every time I get a student who has one of those voices, I just want to throw rocks at them. Anyway, there's this young woman who's working there, and he tells me the story about her where a white guy had come in, and he wanted queso. Well, dude, you're in a taqueria. If you really, really, really want cheese powder and chicken stock, we can whip some up for you. Absolutely, no problem at all. If that's your thing, we can do it. But she didn't know, right? So all she hears is queso. So she brings him queso fresco, that crumbly white cheese. Yeah. And he looks at her, and then he's like, no, and he tries to explain, but he has zero Spanish, right? And so she takes it back, and she comes back with shredded orange cheese, probably cheddar or something else. And he's getting mad because he thinks that she's having him on. But she literally doesn't understand, and he doesn't know that queso's not a Mexico thing. Right? Yeah. And so finally, one of the other guests heard and sort of intervened and explained the thing to him. Yeah. And it was just like, but see, you're not there to experience the culture at that point. You're there to be a consumer, and you've commodified all of the food, and you've even commodified the people into immigrants and non-immigrants. You know all that, right? Yeah. And so rather than experience the culture, you want the culture to conform to your expectation of it. Yeah. And I find that deeply frustrating as a food writer, because I want to go taste weird things, and I want them to be new and different. I don't want to, like I went on a trip one time when I was still teaching high school, and we went with a group of teachers to Dallas, and I was so excited to go to Dallas to try some new restaurants. Well, they voted. Don't ever let anyone tell you democracy is a good idea. They voted. I swear to you, we ended up at Chili's. I was so mad. I was just like, what are you talking? What? Chili's? Yeah. And it's like, but they do have Southwest egg rolls.
Oh, this is different to the one in Oklahoma City. Well, and
I struggle with fear-based people. I do. I struggle with them. And when it comes to food, especially, it's like, dude, if you don't like it, you just spit it out. Yeah. Right? You're just like, I didn't like that. But you've learned something. You've had an experience. Your life has changed, even in a minute way, but it's changed. And if you find something you love, then like that's what happened to me. Like Chris Castro and Carlos Alvarado, the two of them took me to the Southwest side for the first time. And now I've been over there a bunch of times with them, and they've introduced me to not Mexican food, but regional Mexican cuisine. Okay. Sonora, Jalisco, Durango, and you start tasting that and how things are different. It's like there's no. It's like, can you even imagine someone saying, "Well, it's American food"? Yeah. Which one?
Which part of America are we talking about?
And Oklahoma is especially susceptible to this because we are an artificial culture. Like, right, there was this space, and it's like, those people, they don't matter, and these people, whatever. But now all the white folks, come on, it's all free. Yeah. And so they showed up, and they came from everywhere. Right. And so when someone says, what's Oklahoma cuisine? There's no answer to that question.
There isn't a specific.
There's not. And then everybody's like, biscuits and gravy or whatever. Biscuits and gravy are kind of a Depression-era thing. I mean, sure, they existed, but they weren't like a staple until people had to like survive. Yeah. So I like the idea that we are this sort of mix of everything. And so we do have, weirdly enough, key lime pie. Take key lime pie, for example. I talked to Brad Johnson, Hal Smith's executive chef, about this one time. And you know why we have key lime pie all over Oklahoma City? It's because someone in Florida who worked for Hal Smith's company brought the recipe back to Oklahoma, and they put it at Charleston's, and everybody loved it. So now and we think that's like an Oklahoma thing. Do you see any key lime trees around here? No, there's not. But I don't care because it's delicious, and I'm glad that it's here. Yeah. Right? So I want them to feel the exact same way about things that show up, like when Jeff introduces a dish like nam khao, which is their crispy rice dish with fermented ham, and it's amazing. But that's harder to wrap your brain around. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so when Rachel Cope did Gun, rest in peace, for 5 minutes, it was the best restaurant in Oklahoma City. She was really smart and intentional, put the menu outside, talk to people, use social media, and explain to them this really foreign izakaya concept that was coming to Oklahoma City. Because most people haven't ever been to an izakaya before. Educated. Exactly. And she didn't do it in a sort of a looking down way. She did it in a way where it made sense as an Okie. Like Jeff actually used catfish for the karaage catfish instead of what would have been basa or some other kind of fish in Japan. Yeah. And it was a smart way to sort of localize the thing. Because an Okie sits down and is like, oh, I know catfish. Yeah. And his catfish was extraordinary. So that's the sort of thing you have to do to make food make sense to people. So when people, sadly. And people, so I'm just rambling at this point, but you can stop me.
Well, no, because I had this conversation with, who's the guy who does Edible?
Oh, Stuart.
Stuart, I had this conversation with Stuart 3 or 4 months ago about we just had a coffee and spoke about like, why do people go to restaurants and order the same thing? Because it's a fear-based thing. They haven't been educated and they don't, the fear-based of like, and also a monetarily thing too, that like I'm treating myself, going out for dinner, some people, I want to have something, I want to have an experience that I know is safe.
Correct.
I don't want to spend $30, $40, $50 on an experience that I feel like I've wasted. And then I'm going to go and grab Chick-fil-A on the way home.
And I wish people understood that at a more sort of visceral level. And I have to keep, because when you're a food writer, and even a wine writer, I got a bottle in the mail today that's a $200 bottle of wine. Yeah. I wouldn't go to the store and buy that myself. I get that because I'm a writer, right? Yeah. And so you have to keep the economics in your brain at all times.
Right.
And of course I'm going to say, go eat at this place you can't pronounce and you've never heard of and you've never tried the food, because that's what I've chosen to spend my money on.
Yeah.
Right. But if you are, like you say, it's our Friday night out, I have an assumption that most people eat at about 20, 25 restaurants a year.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Because they'll have their regular
maximum
place they go. I think so.
Yeah.
And as of today, I've been at 240 bars, restaurants, and coffee shops in Oklahoma City this year. I did 250 all of last year. I'm already at 240 this year.
Yeah.
So odds are good I'll hit 350. It slows down, because circles get bigger that you have to drive. But I take the job seriously. And I love it. Yeah. And so, but I do think that when someone has $40 to spend and it's their night, then they're going to go to the place that they know the food's going to be consistent. It's going to be. Yeah. That's why House Smith kills.
They're going to Texas Roadhouse with Charleston.
That's why they crush. Yeah. It's because House Smith knows that when you show up, you have a limited amount of money to spend, and you want exactly what you want for your money.
Yeah.
And they've done that with excellence for decades. And so I've always been impressed by how they do that sort of consistency. And a lot of that is Brad Johnson, because he is a genius of a chef in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to providing this kind of food. So I try to be cautious about saying you should try this or disdaining their sort of fear about that, because I'm sure that most of those people, if you said, listen, money's no object, order whatever you want off the menu, they would try a bunch of new things.
Yeah,
they would.
That's what I do when I go, and like you get a phone call from Valona or whoever says, hey, we're opening a new restaurant.
Yeah, exactly.
You get a free meal. She's like, order whatever you want.
And then you order things.
Thank you so much.
That's right.
Like I had the duck at whatever that restaurant, Skirvin. I never would have ordered duck. Duck is so good there, whatever it was, and they like fried cantaloupe or whatever.
If it's a French chef that can't cook duck, he shouldn't be a chef.
Very true.
I mean, that's
he's very French.
He is talented. He is. I had that same duck dish, and it was so spectacular.
Yeah.
And the cantaloupe was a genius sort of addition to that.
I was shocked because I didn't think it was cantaloupe when I ate it. When I
amazing.
Cutting into it, I'm like, oh, this is actually cantaloupe.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's for me is one of the challenges, is to sort of write about things that people know and love, and then to write about things that they don't know and challenges them a little bit.
Yeah.
Like our taco spread last year in July was absolutely brilliant, thanks to, again, Christopher Lee. But I told them early on, and the magazine has been very supportive of this drive towards diversity.
Right.
I told them we're going to do taquerias. We're not going to do gringo tacos for a taco feature. Yeah. And so we found a way to do both. But the problem isn't like when you see tacos from taquerias on the South Side, they're not necessarily photogenic.
Right.
They're delicious.
You're right.
But they're not photogenic.
Yeah.
And so you do the best you can, and you just acknowledge that, listen, we're not going to have the most beautiful food shots in this story, but we're going to represent it honestly, right?
Yeah.
We're going to tell, and this is how we're telling the story. Quite frankly, a chorizo and egg breakfast taco is not a pretty thing when it's opened up in the photo, but you know what? It's delicious. It's delicious. So you have to sort of, I just did a piece on Guatemalan food because I'm madly in love with Tienda Guatemala. And it's one of those fear moments, because you walk in and there's a whole mercado to the right, and then there's a little kitchen to the left. And one of my favorite things is to get there in the morning when there's this group of women just standing around this mound of masa, just slapping it out, right? Yeah. Making pupusas and tortillas and all this stuff. But when you walk in there, you don't know what to do. Now, they're smart. This dude spotted me. He clocked me as soon as I walked in. And he came over, he goes, hello, welcome. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And he said, do you know what you need? And I was like, yes. And he walked me through the whole process. Yeah. But every small restaurant can't do that. Right? I will say at Tienda, the family's been around for a long time. It used to be Chaltepes in Plaza District. When I go to the counter now, there's one lady back there that is comfortably bilingual, and she sees white people. She's the one that comes to help you. Yeah. And she can walk you through everything. But it's hard for a person who's never done this to walk into one of those places.
To have the confidence. Just like, I'm going to go in and I might feel like an idiot, but it's okay.
Yes. No, that's 100% true. her name is going to elude me right now. The last director of the La Bantinoa, the Southwest 29th District, Emma Dean Kratashwell. We were talking about this. They know it's not like that this is a big secret. One of the things they need to do in that district to increase business is to make white people feel comfortable coming down there to eat. Yeah. And so part of that is streetscape, and they're working on that. They get a big grant to change the sort of streetscape of Southwest 29th between Western and May. And then making sure that the signage works and everything else works and you feel comfortable doing that. But and I said this recently, and I mean it, the experience of being uncomfortable is really important, right? I've been in enough countries where I wasn't majority.
Not just in eating.
That's right, in everything. And white people in America are very used to feeling comfortable. And so if you put them, it's why white people yell at Hispanic kids in McDonald's. It's because they don't speak enough. And it's like, are we really doing this right now?
Are we still at this point in life right now? Like, come on.
But it's like, so to be uncomfortable is hard, but it's really important that you get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So you walk into this strange place. First thing you have to do, honestly, is just ask for help. Yeah. And they want to take your money. They are 100% on board with giving you food and then you giving them money. But you have to sort of, like I had this amazing moment during the lockdown. I was going to Tin Tan down on South Penn, Western. It's a burrito place. You've seen the trucks driving around, but if you go to the place and get them there fresh, they're amazing. So I got going in, and the son, he speaks comfortable English. We're chatting every day because I'm just trying to help restaurants. We're going out every day and getting to-go food. Well, as soon as the lockdown's over, I go back to Tin Tan, and I walk in, and the board's up there, and I order just what it says. And the lady on the hotline looks at me like, so I said it again, and she went, and then she started pointing, and I'm like, oh my God, what happens now? And well, there's this a teenager next to me, Latina, and she said, what are you trying to order? And I pointed at it, and I said it to her, and then she ordered in completely different words. It was one of those lunch things I really wanted to talk to her. I really wanted 5 minutes to say, okay, what did you do that I didn't do?
Right.
And why does it say that if you said that? Right. Yeah. Those moments are just going to happen.
They are.
Right.
Yeah.
And you just have to it's like you being from Wales. Yeah. Like people from England even go to Wales and are like, well, I'm sorry, what did you say?
Yeah, exactly.
What is that? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. That's an important thing to me. Is if you walk into a place and you don't look like the people who own it or who are eating there, just be okay with being uncomfortable for a minute. It'll be all right. To that
point, I love the videos that you see on social media of like the typical white kid in the middle of Asia ordering in their own specific language, right? Because the looks that he gets from like ordering exactly from this tiny little language in this little town that probably only have that language, like. It's fascinating, but to your point, you're always going to be uncomfortable when you go to these very authentic restaurants, and that's where you get the best food. Yeah, and I'll for people listening, I'll put the description, the list of the top 100 places in the description, so you guys can go see it. Because tick off those places, right,
dude?
And a lot of them aren't that expensive.
Oh my God, that's what drives me crazy.
Yes.
Like if you go to the South Side, if you go to Southwest 29th, and just pick a taqueria, Los Dos Velados, it doesn't really matter to me. Just pick one and go in there, and they're going to give you a full plate of food for $9. You're like, I'm sorry, I should give you more money at this point.
One of my favorite videos, I think it was maybe News 9 did it. They like literally took $20 and went around the local. There was like I can't remember who it was in it. I'll have to find it. And they literally had $20 and they went to like 5 food trucks and spent $20. And at the end of it, they didn't have enough. Like they couldn't physically eat any more food.
There's a truck that's parked at Northwest 10th and Portland almost every day now. Taqueria Rodriguez, and I like this young man a lot. I speak as much Spanish as he spees English.
Yeah,
that's all. So we do a lot of nodding.
A lot of thumbs up.
That. Yeah, exactly right. So the first time I go, it's the racial profile in reverse. Yeah. It's like every once in a while I'll go to a taqueria and they'll put that sad queso on the table. It's like, I don't need that. But so I go to the truck and he looked at me and he goes, quesabirria? And I'm like, lengua? He goes, quesabirria. And I'm like, okay. So I got his quesabirria tacos. They were life-changing. Yeah. Like, I don't know what he's doing, but you get 3 of them, $11. You can't eat 3. There's no way you can eat 3 of these things. So I called Chris Castro. I'm like, have you had Taqueria Rodriguez? He goes, those are the best quesabirria tacos hands down in the city. I'm like, I'm glad we're on the same page because they are life-changing, right? Yeah. And it's $11 and it's 2 meals. because you can't eat all.
Right.
I promise you can't eat all three. And so there's all of those places that, like the Tacos El Carbone. You'll see those places every once in a while. There's one up on 10th now between Portland and Meridian. And so on the right side of the road, you walk in, you get a quarter chicken, all these tortillas, vegetables, and the guy said $10. I'm like, what? He said, yeah, $10. And then you start looking for a tip jar or something. He's like, can I give you more money? I don't know. Because it's 3 meals. It's like, what? And so I wish people knew that a little, that the price points over there make sense given some like the overhead that they're paying and the fact they don't have a lot of other headaches that modern restaurants try to contend with. And, I'm sympathetic to the plight of restaurants right now, trust me.
Oh, yeah.
But I also know that people, as inflation increases and they have less money to spend, those actually become excellent options. I mean, like fantastic options. And that's true of noodle places too, like Noodle Bowl, like Northern Noodle House over here right off of Classen, and Magic Noodle in Norman. That's 2 meals and it's $9. And it's delicious food.
Yeah,
right?
Stop buying $8 coffees.
And for God's sake, stop buying boxes of ramen. You can get real ramen in this city. Yeah.
Oh, we've all been there.
Yeah. No, I was too in college.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But still, you're right. It's so yeah. This has been epic. I can't thank you enough for sharing, and I'm sure like we connect. Like we can talk about this for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure we will over a few drinks one day. But for people listening, we'll put the link to the top 100.
That'd be great
because they can at least start to check those off.
Yeah.
And then Greg, your Instagram is @xpasta. I'll put that in the description as well. And you're a writer, not a food writer. I'm
a writer. Yes.
So I'll see a lot of your stuff in Business Magazine now.
Yeah. Actually, yes. I knocked out 2 for digital today, but we just finished our Black-owned business article, which I'm just so proud of that issue, and we got so much help, and I'm so proud of the white folks involved because they listened. Like they didn't.
Right.
It was just a great.
It's not just a box tick.
Right, and JD Baker, who used to work for the mayor, he's a great kid, and he's the one that told me. He said, white people have been telling our stories for a long time. I'm like, okay, heard.
Yeah,
and he can write. He ends up writing part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just this great collaborative experience where I just. It's not. I don't know how often I've said this lately, but I mean it in all sincerity. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing over there right now.
Yeah.
And at all of our publications, Sarah Gay Waters has 405 Home. She does a brilliant job with that as well. So it's a good place to be right now. Mm-hmm. We're an amazing city, and I think we're doing a great job of telling those stories. But I also think Stuart and the Edible team, I think they're doing a fantastic job. Dave Cathy and I have been friends for a while now. I think he does a good job covering food as well.
Yeah.
We're a collaborative, cooperative, let's be nice to each other kind of city, and I hope it always stays that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have me coming in who has no idea about food, but somehow has a social media following, trying not to step on toes. So I am looking for as much guidance in food stuff as possible, because that's one thing I'd love to get into more of, because coming from the UK, I don't really have a palate.
Yeah, I was going to say, I ate over there for a while.
Oh, it's not good.
Yeah, there's a dish I've never been able to find again. I went to a pub and they had it was a pastry filled with burgundy stew. And I swear to you, you need to put a nose bag on a horse so it can eat. Yeah. I swear that lady called it nose bag that day, but it's been 30 years now. And I've never been able to find a recipe for it or anything else, but it literally was pastry full of beef bourguignon. Yeah. And it was just pub fare, and it was fantastic.
I know, yeah.
But as a rule, not great food in England, yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Despite Gordon Ramsay's greatest efforts these days.
Somehow. But anyway.
Yes, exactly.
Greg, thanks so much for coming down. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it.
It's been a blast, and I'm excited to start ticking off this list on my own, because my wife loves to eat spicy food, and I do not. But if I can take her to a few places and kind of put a smile on her face, that puts me in a good books.
And honestly, some of those things will save you some money. Yeah,
definitely. So for people listening, we'll put the link to the top 100 in Oklahoma City in the description, and Greg's Instagram, and we will catch you next episode. Cheers. This podcast is presented by the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, telling Oklahoma stories through its people since 1927. Follow them online at oklahomahof.com, and definitely on Instagram at oklahomahof.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.